Hi guys, from Pax Europiana, this time again from Upper Austria on my birthday weekend, 53 I get, and tomorrow actually. Thanks a lot for all your congratulations, thanks a lot for all the subscribers. And I will now talk about natural disaster and civil protection. Because you know, Pax Europiana is also about good governance and about a lot of topics like energy policy, about the European Union. I want to advocate a strong European Union, one which is really backed by the people and which has also the endorsement of the people. And therefore, we have to address and we have to discuss the questions of natural disaster. This summer we had a lot of man-made disasters, like we had the fall of Kabul and our mistaken conclusion of the Nord Stream 2, and we made a lot of mistakes unfortunately this summer. But we also had quite terrible natural disasters: the floods in Germany and the Netherlands, the wildfires in Greece, Italy, Croatia, Macedonia, Albania, Algeria, and in many other places, and the disaster with the earthquake in Haiti. So there is a lot of reasons to assess if what we do in the European Union is correct in terms of emergency response, civil protection, and also the protection against wildfires, floods, earthquakes, and all the other things. Yeah. We are actually quite good in financial support afterwards. Now there's 30 billion of the German government for the victims. Also the Greek government has pledged a lot of support. So afterwards we are quite good. And in the last 10 years we have also improved our emergency cooperation mechanism. So when there was, for example, the fire in Greece and in Macedonia, Slovakians and Austrian firefighters were going there and helping the guys in Greece and in Macedonia and in Albania and in other countries. I don't know all the missions, but I saw they were welcomed as conquering heroes in Slovakia by the president, and deservedly so. They were really doing a great job and helping their friends in Greece, the fellow Europeans. That's European solidarity, that's very good, and that's really excellent. But now let me a bit discuss why exactly Austrian and Slovak firefighters, especially the Austrian system I know quite well. Just now there was a civil alarm for some accident here in this region where my parents live, and I would like to explain why the system works, why it's important to have it, and why we need a good mix of professional firefighters, which also have the task firefighters is a little bit complicated. Maybe it's not only fires, it's also in car accidents, also in the case of flooding, also when there is a chemical disaster, also when there is any other natural emergency which where people require help. And of course you need professional firefighters who have all the training. And that's what the big cities can afford. You know, in Vienna and Linz you have professional firefighters, and every country has them. Also special companies like airports have professional firefighters, because simply the risk is there and also the funding is there. But the specific thing which I very much promote is voluntary fire brigade fighters. And that means basically in the countryside where the population density is much smaller, but obviously the risk of fire flooding is maybe much higher, because there is obviously the question of response time. How long does it take for a professional firefighter from a big urban center to go to some rural area? It takes a long time. So the absolute necessity from economic but also from response time is that you have trained people who are equipped, available very close to the emergency. And that can only be affordable if you have it on a voluntary basis. Basically the way the Austrian countryside and every area outside of the big city, I call now the countryside in a way, the rural areas, the smaller cities and the regions out there, how they work is that basically every male individual, and today also many of the female individuals who live in that houses outside of the big urban centers, but in some cases even in the urban centers, are voluntarily joining fire brigades from the youth on, and they are trained and equipped and organized. and permanently organized in a semi-military, if you want, militia style institution. That's what we call the voluntary fire brigades. They have ranks, they have uniforms, they have military kind of discipline as well when they are in action. And then basically everybody who is living there turns into a trained and equipped and organized civil emergency responder. And then you can help effectively. Then you can respond to emergencies, from earthquakes to fires to hail. In summer, for example in June, before I left for my Balkan tour, we had a very big freak hailstorm here in this region. It was a big disaster. A lot of cars were destroyed, a lot of roofs were destroyed, and it was a big disaster. Who is helping fast in such a case? It's impossible for a state to have so many paid individuals, trained and skilled and equipped, permanently employed. Economically, it's impossible to have them to respond to such a one-time emergency competently. Why? It's simply economics. You can have some employees in that sector, but they are not needed probably most of the year. So you keep them empty, training, and then when they are needed in an emergency, which is so overwhelming, obviously there are just a few available. So you need to have a system where voluntarily, and I will explain how that works. It's not completely voluntarily, and it's also not completely without pay. There is an economic system and an economic case behind it. And you need also then to have them available on the broad. The population basically must be trained for such emergency. And that's only possible with a voluntary fire brigade system like we have it in Austria. I think that should be done from Bangladesh to Haiti to all countries, because I see now this heartbreaking video in television about Haiti, and then the people say the government is useless. Yes, the idea that a country like Bangladesh or a country like Haiti can have a government that is so well funded to be able to respond to such an emergency is totally unrealistic. It will never happen. Because these are very fragile governments with a low taxpayer base, with a low compliance situation and a low consensus from the taxpayers, and a very fragile economy. So the idea that it's also not the case in Austria, not in America. We cannot have a permanent kind of emergency team stationed. And obviously we should also help in case of emergency, and the Americans are helping, the Europeans are helping, but there is also a limit what is economically rational to send guys from America, from Europe to Haiti for emergency response. That's a very expensive way to do it. Obviously you need to do it in some emergency and you need to help, but there is the need for the population in Haiti to get organized in voluntary fire brigades. You can call it a bit differently, but the idea is that everybody is able to protect his own house and the houses in its region. And he must not be only trained, but he must be equipped and organized, and competently allowed in a kind of, it's not so easy to do it, because you need to give legal rights to the fire brigades or to the civil emergency teams. They must be able to act. They must be legally endorsed and agreed that the state can also give them rights in a kind of public-private partnership. It's maybe called a concessionary system. But the system must be organized that you really then have the ability to act decisively in the moment and not have a competence kind of issue or frozen in inactivity because you don't know what is the right of that association to do. In Austria, it's very clear. They know exactly what is to do and they are legally very much organized. And that's very important. And the second thing is also that you need to be very clear what is the funding. Because also when there is an emergency and there is an accident, for example, the insurance has also to pay for the services delivered, so that the system can also have some funding aspect. The insurance sector must also work, because the insurances are also then part contributing to such a voluntary system, because it's much cheaper for them to have a voluntary system, because then, for example, you have a faster emergency support. it's not only the ambulance who has to come to an emergency, because somebody has to have the equipment to open the car of the crash site, for example. Somebody has to clean up the crash site afterwards, and so on and so on. If that's working, that's much cheaper than to have a complete mess and much more accidents or other cars basically crashing into it, because also the fire brigade is then blocking the traffic and regulating it. And if you want to do that all with the police or with the ambulance, then good luck. It's obviously not working. And such kind of civil protection mechanism organized on a voluntary basis, because people voluntarily contribute, but it's organized on a legal, on a firm footing, financially and also legally in a regulatory sense. This is very important, and that's why I call for a European Union-wide system to have the regulatory situation and also support the development of such a system in countries like Greece and later Albania, Macedonia, but also in Italy it seems to be needed. Everywhere it's needed that the population itself is trained, equipped and regulatory organized in a situation they can actively then help in the case of emergency, because it makes a huge difference if you are trained. If you are trained and you know what you do in an emergency because you have done it on weekend after weekend, you trained exactly what to do, and then you are effectively possible to intervene. Otherwise you stand there with your hands, you think you want to help, but you can a little bit work with your muscles, but if you don't know what to do, you are basically just in the way of the real emergency responders. And that's of course a real problem. So then you need to be equipped. It was heartbreaking to see the people now in Algeria or partly in Greece, where everybody, they were making a lot of statements, and I saw the media reports where the guys in Greece, they were saying we defend the houses of our neighbors, but then you need also to be trained and equipped, because it makes a huge difference if it's legally prescribed and also trained and tested, if you have water connections. Our guys from Austria, they were going then to Macedonia, and the others in Slovakia. There was also Austrians in Greece, to my best knowledge. I don't know exactly who was where now in this emergency summer. But the question is always, do you have water access? Is there a plan? Is there some organization? Is it organized that there is every some square kilometer enough water for potential wildfire extinction? I mean, this is something you cannot invent in the moment. You need to build the infrastructure, you need to train the people. Then I saw the pictures where there were some Algerians with some kind of trees fighting the fire with their blank hands. I mean, that this is then leading to people dying is also obvious. You need to have the people equipped with and trained with the equipment. Then in the emergency, everything has to go fast. Because if there is a flooding or an earthquake or there is a fire or there is an accident or a wildfire, whatever kind of emergency, a freak storm, you need to have people there fast, because after 3 days most of the people are dead or the forest is gone. So you need to have it prepared. And this is not the state alone which can do that. This is the state setting up the population, training the population to be able and equipped in the case of emergency to act decisively in the defense of their own property and the property of the neighbor and the forest around it. And then it works. And there's many ways to fund such a system. One via the insurance sector, one when they do emergency, that there is cost accountability. So they're coming, then they can also bill the kind of work they have provided towards either the insurances or the state or the private individual who is guilty or has requested the services. And also to fund them via some property taxes, some contribution of the state, that there's not only the funding is going automatically just to the professional fire brigades, but the voluntary fire brigades has also some public backing. And they can be supported with equipment purchases, and of course access to the training facilities. And also what in the reality is very often we have a voluntary army, like a professional army, yes, a small one with obligatory draft. And when you see, and we have obviously a lot of people in the civil administration, what they often do is basically they are like working in the district administration or in the military during the week, but on the weekend they just turn on the different kind of fire brigade uniform, and on the weekend they are the commanders of the fire brigade in the region. So it is also important that the state then is supporting such a system, that they can, when they are normally in the military or in the civil administration or also in private business, that this is something which is regulated. When there is an emergency, the guys can run away from the offices, and then they can turn on the other code, and then they can run in the well-organized system already towards addressing the fire problems, or the flood problem. When there is no regulatory backing, then the employers will say, no, you have to sit here and watch the fire burning. When there is regulatory backing by the state, then basically all the people we have in the civil administration, hundreds and thousands of people we have in civil administration, some of them are trained. Then basically their colleagues take over the work schedule, and the ones who are trained and the ones who are uniformed and the ones who are equipped, they know where their stuff is, they can drive then by their cars to that emergency, and then they park close, they change the other guys from have brought already the equipment, and suddenly you have a lot of trained and equipped and organized people available to address an emergency when you need it. And the economy doesn't break down because the civil administration, because the other guys know, oh, he is a fire guy, he has to go now, I have to back him up in work and in the office. And then he comes back in the evening, he saved some lives, he has saved some property, he fought the fire, and then he takes a day off, and everybody is okay with that one as well. And 2 days later he comes back and he does and says thank you for the guys, and they say thank you to him because it could have been their house or their family in the car accident, or it could be some other emergency in the water or whatever, a freak storm. And the guys who are trained, equipped and organized and legitimately supported by a regulatory framework which works, and they go back to their work and they have saved lives and saved property, and the world is better off. And then they get paid for that services as well, and they get also funded via their voluntary association. And they will get some money maybe for some missions, but normally they are paid already in the civil administration where they work or in the jobs. They just do that voluntarily. They are not forced. But when the alarm comes, they are running to their mobilization points, or to wherever they are told by the WhatsApp group, hey, you have to go directly to that house and we bring the equipment, and suddenly it works. And then a society can protect itself cost efficiently and effectively with real impact, and the system is working so good that we can also help Greeks and Macedonians, because the guys are there, they are equipped, and they actually like to help, and then they can go even and take the equipment down to the Balkans or to Greece. But the question is, why doesn't Greece have such a system? Why don't the Balkans have such a system? And there is a lot of Austrian politicians in the last 30 years, I know many of them, who have made that case already to have it. But there was never any kind of agreement to really have it effectively done European-wide. Because, okay, to train for emergency, why we should do that? Our population doesn't want these uniforms. Okay, but they don't want fires as well. And then we do it state-wise. But all these poor states in the south of Europe, they don't have the fiscal capacity. We also don't have the fiscal capacity. No state can have an emergency, civil kind of emergency organized like that, completely available 24 hours everywhere. It's simply economically, fiscally, completely impossible. Now when we talk about climate change and all this talk now, that this is really very important because we have these disasters. Actually, I think we always had a lot of disasters, and now much less people, statistically it's true, much less people die from natural disasters because we have much better preparation levels, we have also much better first response mechanism, we have much more information access, we can help much faster. So the level of natural disaster deaths, and also our medical systems are much better. So the level of natural disasters has massively decreased. But of course there is a lot of freak activities, like storms and so, and people are of course very concerned. then the standard explanation in the media is it's all climate change. So we just invest in climate change, against climate change, then we will have less of these storms. And unfortunately, the side of civil protection is not getting the funding. And then it's a very indirect way, of course climate change is, and of course there is this connection that when it's getting hotter, then you have issues. Good, I accept all these things. But it's very indirect, the way that we decarbonize and in 50 years we have a better climate and then we have less accidents. This doesn't really help anybody who is under flood or wildfire or earthquake at the moment. Yeah? So we also need a very serious discussion in Europe about the establishment of voluntary fire brigades as civil emergency responders, civil protection and emergency responders EU-wide and also in all the neighboring countries. And this system must be established similar like the Austrian system. And people who live in the countryside, especially outside of the urban centers, must be trained in this voluntary system and they have this kind of understanding after all these disasters, I'm sure. And that's a similar system must be also financially incentivized, regulatory backing from Greece to Albania to Italy, EU-wide. This system must be built up. And it takes some time, yes, and we have also to pool much more resources, because when there is more resources for that in Slovakia and Austria and Germany, then obviously they have to be available, but it must be also compensated financially, because that system is not completely for free. It also costs something. And it's much better if every country builds that up and then we pool the excess resources, because at some time you have a wildfire in the south, a flooding in the north, you have an earthquake only at one place in Europe or in the world. You can then shift resources and pool it effectively if the system is established effectively, the cost sharing is agreed and the cost pricing is agreed, and then the mobilization system and the legal responsibility. And for all this we need the European regulatory framework about the prices, the costs and the responsibilities, the regulatory system, and it must be done European-wide, as in so many things. Let me also address the issue when it comes to this kind of complexity and trade-off between the issue of keeping everything naturally and like it was in the past, and investing in nature in order to make sure that you have the nature serving for the humanity. And it's a big debate now in the green movement, but also with a lot of people who really very much engaged work against climate change, like in Austria, for example, and our Ministry of Agriculture, and she is also responsible for environmental protection. And you see this kind of amazing trade-off, and here also a realistic approach must be done, because water must be regulated. If you don't regulate rivers, and then you have them wild as they are, and then you have big disasters as we had it in Germany. And in Austria we also had floodings as well in areas where the water protection system was delayed because of the green movement protesting against the flood protection measures, because they were destroying the natural habitat of the river. And I had the same debate in Albania about all these people who want to keep rivers naturally. Naturally means they flood every year, and every some years they flood extreme. So if you want to have that one, then you cannot allow building close to that rivers, or you have to resettle the people who are already historically living close to the rivers, or you accept that every year or in the summer or in the winter, depends when it is, you have a big flooding disaster, and from time to time a very big one. No, the rational things, which is human, it's human. To invest as a society when there is a village living close to the river, you have to regulate that river, that the flooding protection is up or down of this village. And of course you have to work with the settlement plans and with the urban plans, that you don't allow in very dangerous areas like we had it in the past. We allowed building in the avalanche areas, yeah? We allowed it close to the rivers. No, now we are much more stricter, and that's also necessary. But you need to regulate the rivers. And you cannot, in the moment of the disaster, regulate the river. You have to do it in the good years. You have to invest every year significantly in floodwater protection. And the same is true with the forests in southern Europe, which are very fragile. And it's very hot there. but it's not automatically the heat which destroys the forests. Yeah? It is the way that they are getting very dry because of the heat, and then there comes an external reason, mostly a fire by other tourists or by land speculators or by other people who are hiking and are not careful, or by other people who are making a fire there, and then the whole fire goes up. It's the same in America, it's the same everywhere. The logic is always these fires are human-made. Yeah? Not always by mafia land speculators, but it's very much connected with the future urban planning of this land. Because if it turns then from forest into building land, obviously it turns from €2 to €400 increase, or maybe much more if it has a sea view. And then it's a very lucrative if you are connected with the mayor to then say, oh, the land is anyhow burned, let's build some apartments, let's get rich together. And that's of course what the mafia is doing, and not always the mafia in a sense, but what is very rational in a way, as long as we don't have decent urban planning in these areas. First of all, that's the one thing. Then you need also decent forest management. And forest management, decently, we had a lot of debate. You need access roads for the fire protection, but you need also fire dividers. That's also very logical. When there's a fire on the left side of the road and the road is big enough and it's somehow cut, then the probability, of course, there is a lot of wind increase, I know, and maybe you need to make bigger roads, but you need sustainable to manage a forest. A forest which is kept wild is obviously a forest which has to burn from time to time to get the material out. A natural forest, the natural cycle of forest is fire, and this is since ever, since they are forests. So if you don't want that natural cycle, when we think that it should be permanent forested, it makes a lot of sense for climate change, for the people who live from it, for the houses who are there, for tourism. You don't want to have burnt waste sites. You have to manage it. You have to clean the forest regularly. You have to take the old material out. You have to make roads inside the forest in order to make dividing lines for the fire. You have to systematically work with the forest all the time. It's the same with the water, the same with the forest. And it's all very much depending on human decisions. That means the regulatory decision where you can build what and how you treat the water, how you treat the wilderness, the forest. If you don't have property rights, when it's unclear who is this forest belongs to, or when the state forest services doesn't care and doesn't do the work because they don't think it's lucrative enough, and then this gets very wild. That means a lot of underwood, a lot of old wood is then lying there, and that's like the full extreme recipe for the next wildfire. So you need clarity in the property, you need clarity in the urban planning, long-term stability in the urban planning, you need decency what you allow where, and you need also then to have the forest well managed. And that's the same for the fire, for the water and for the fire. Then you can really help. For example, now, what's happening? Yeah, there's some forest machine coming. So I hope you can still hear me. Yeah, that's my message today, basically. That's, I think you have understood. We need, yeah, you see, this is now, because in Austria, I told you there was this alarm, so probably there was a car accident. It was the first rain now after a long time, so the roads are very slippery. And then there was, assuming, I don't know, but there was this alarm, so the guys came, there was the mobilization, and the wounded are then flown out by helicopter. All works within, 20, 30 minutes. Yeah. The guys are there, they help, they provide the security for the spot, and they call the ambulance if it's needed. Then the guys are flying him to the hospital in Linz in that case. Yeah? This is from the Austrian automobile touring services. Because they all work together and they have this kind of systematic agreement. It's all regulatory backed. And when you have a car accident, you can be sure within some minutes, when there is the alarm coming, there will be somebody to take you out with competent tools to open the car. And then there will be an ambulance within 8 minutes. And then if it's needed, they will take you to the helicopter, and half an hour later, you are already in a hospital. And then you can survive such terrible accidents. Yeah? because the system works, and everything from the first responders, the various systems, from the fire brigade towards who then, the guys then clean up the place, yeah, or they call then the truck service to tow the vehicle, but there must be, for example, there's some oil spill afterwards, yeah, or something else, and then they clean it up. And then it works also that later then they put the bills up, and then they say who has the insurance, what happened, who is guilty, and it's all getting then worked out, and then everybody gets paid as well for the services provided. Yeah? And you had the unfortunate situation of an accident, but the system works. And this must be in all the EU, that the system works absolutely. That's also when we as an Austrian citizen, when I go to another place in the EU, then I expect exactly a similar kind of system to work. Yeah? And then it's solidarity, and then it's EU citizenship, and then it's somehow, okay, we understand we are one union, and whatever happens, you know, when something tragic happens, okay, that was an accident or it was a mistake, and then that is sorted out by the courts. But in the moment, the first responder situation must be good, and it must be also in natural disasters and in all other of these things. And if we don't have such a system, then of course we lose legitimacy. And of course then we can improvise in the moment, but we should be smarter than improvising in the moment fast and trying to help hectically, and then other people might get hurt as well. No, people must be trained. People must be equipped, must be organized, must be regulatory backed up, and then the whole system works everywhere. And that's actually globally the system. Yeah? It is the same economics everywhere. It's the same natural disasters everywhere, from Haiti to Bangladesh, in Africa as well. Voluntary civil protection mechanisms is complicated to build up, but it's possible to have them. And then the associations who are working on it, you know, also the Automobile Touring Club, and you know, everybody, this must be everywhere exactly working. It's quite similar. And so that's the way to mitigate also the effects of climate change in a very concrete way from the emergency responder side. You know, it's not only decarbonization, public transport, and all these very expensive things, which are also very important, yeah. But you need to have the emergency responding side, the civil protection side as well, reorganized and effectively managed in order to be able to make sure there are less people hurt, and those who have their properties or life damaged by natural disasters can be sure there is effective help and support mechanisms all around them, because they are part of it. They also help, either with their taxpayers' money or with their personal training and skills levels. And that's, I think, a system we need everywhere in the European Union, in the European continent, and honestly, I think globally, exactly. This is a very well working system, cost effective and with high efficiency, and it is something to study and to learn and to adopt and to repeat any and everywhere. And I was talking the same things in Kosovo, and I remember then there were, oh, that's very paramilitary form of organization of the society. Okay, good. Yeah. Then the international donors didn't support it in Kosovo, because they said, no, everybody should, no, that's too much organization for a society. But the freedom needs organization as well. Freedom requires the rule of law. Freedom requires also associations and voluntary cooperation of free people. It's not that freedom is somehow chaotically organizing itself. Freedom needs security and protection. They need also this civil protection attitude. As we have a free society can only survive in the broader context of external security in an alliance like NATO. It's the same as well. Freedom needs very much to be organized in internal security, and with a police force, obviously, in the rule of law, the courts, and also with an effective civil protection mechanism, which is not completely free for all. No, it takes a lot of lifelong of training. It takes the institutions to back it up. It needs the institutional cooperation of the people and of the associations, of the state as well. It needs regulatory clarity and a role. Multi-stakeholder, it's the term, but it needs everybody to know where he is the part of the system where he can help, and it needs to be trained and funded and organized and equipped. And this is the way to do it. Good. My call for voluntary fire brigades everywhere. But first of all, let's do it European-wide, and let's make sure that also the accession countries have a similar system, and that this is really a European priority of the future. Civil protection done in an EU agency for civil protection, not only in the DG, which is already doing that, but we need that much more and higher focus as well, and that must be one of the key pillars to remedy the effects of climate change and actually of road safety, of fire safety, of basically the property rights. Because your properties and your life is also then much safer when there is effective help in the moment you need it. And that's very important for all aspects of the society, the economy. And so this is really a key moment also for people to stay in countries, because when you are sure that you have support there and mechanism and everything works, then your intention to emigrate because you want to live in a country that works is maybe much lower. Anyhow, so many aspects. Good. Thanks a lot for listening, and more to come, and join the voluntary fire brigades wherever you live. If not, build it up. And if you are a politician, please do the regulatory work required in order to get this done. Thanks a lot from Pax Europiana. More to come. Bye.